How's it going, my friend? Welcome back to another episode of the Year of Plenty podcast, the show to help you get closer to your food source and learn the skills to make every year a year of plenty. On this podcast, we discuss all things wild food, homesteading, nutrition, traditional foodways, and so much more. And I'm pumped that you're here and along for the ride. As always, I'm your host, Poldy Wieland, and today we have a really special episode. A few weeks ago, Lindy and I had a chance to sit down with one of my role models, Randy Newberg, and record the conversation you're about to hear. If you don't know who he is, Randy is a passionate hunter and the voice of the public land hunter here in America. With decades of experience on public lands, he's become a leading advocate for self-guided hunters and others who appreciate public lands. Randy hosts two popular TV shows, Fresh Tracks and On Your Own Adventures, and a Hunt Talk podcast where he speaks unfiltered about hunting and conservation. Randy also represents hunters in Congress and serves on the boards of several hunting and conservation groups. Our main goal for this episode was to sit down with Randy and hear all about his passion for wild food and conservation. And boy, oh boy, did we have an awesome conversation. Personally, I have to say that this is one of my favorite podcasts I've ever recorded. And that's all I'm going to say for now because I don't want to spoil anything. All right, that's all I want to say for the intro. Get ready for an entertaining conversation with Randy Newberg. Hey, folks, I'm here today with co-host Lindy and Randy Newberg. Randy, how's it going?
It's going wonderful. It's Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
Woohoo!
Beautiful, another late July day in Montana. What are we doing indoors? We should have done this outside.
We should have done this.
I
All the
know.
smoke outside right now is pretty gnarly.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it looks like a lightning storm's
It
coming.
did.
So.
We
Yeah.
couldn't even tell with the smoke if it's a storm cloud or
Yeah, we
just fog from the smoke.
saw
or what.
some lightning come through and we're like, is that actually a storm cloud right now? Because the whole thing just blends in with the smoke.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
well,
Yeah.
tis the season, I guess, for smoke.
Yeah, sadly. Last year we got pretty lucky, I feel like.
Yeah,
Mm.
really
This
lucky.
year the berry season is great, it seems like.
Yeah.
But the fire season is pretty bad.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, thanks for coming to my office.
Yeah,
you
no,
guys saved
thank-
me the trip of having to go to your place.
Yeah, thank you for hosting us here in this awesome office,
Yeah.
like, studio. You know, it's pretty, really legit here. We love it.
Yeah. It's very cool.
It's definitely the best studio we have recorded in, so that's awesome.
Cool.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I'm glad we got a chance to meet up in Big Sky and
Yep.
visit for a little bit.
For
Yeah.
TAC.
Yeah.
Yep. And yeah, you know, I've been following you for a really long time. And first off, I think I want to say the stuff you put out there for people listening that don't know about you already. You know, we have a lot of foragers in the audience, not just hunters. Your stuff is just so valuable, really, really good. I moved you 3 years ago now, or 4 almost, and it's just helped me immensely grow my elk hunting skills and whatnot. So thanks for
Okay.
that.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Yeah. And most people know you for your involvement in, I would say, in the elk hunting world and
Yeah.
conservation. And we want to get into some of that in a bit, but you know, you told us in Attack that you're also really into the wild food aspect of all these
Mhm.
things. And that often people don't talk to you enough about that. So we were like,
Yeah.
well, the
That's
Year of
good for
Plenty
us.
podcast. That's what we're all about. And
Well, I hope I don't sound like too much of a bumpkin when we get into some of this stuff because where I grew up, it was wild food.
yeah.
It was so much a part of my life, and it just has stayed that way.
So tell us a little bit about that, because you mentioned that it was a very big part of your family, like what you guys did traditionally. And tell us a little bit about how did that influence, you know, those experiences as a kid influence how you look at wild food today?
Yeah. At the time, when you're born into it, you really don't have the context to understand how unique it is. So I grew up in this little town in northern Minnesota called Big Falls. And my dad and my grandmother are the first two generations in the United States. My great-grandfather came from Finland, and on the other side of that, from Sweden. And so when they came to northern Minnesota, they just brought with them all their food skills from Scandinavia.
Yeah.
And that was fishing and hunting and foraging and everything else. And so,
And fermented shark.
yeah. And then the Norwegian side brought that thing called lutefisk.
Yeah.
It's like, you could have left that back in Norway. But it was just what we did. And I didn't think anything of it, that everybody had a garden. You know, this time of year, like right about now, the raspberries, wild raspberries and the wild strawberries ripen. And in about another week or so, the wild blueberries ripen. And so berry season is really a big thing. Everybody went and did it. If you were old enough to stand up and hold a bucket, you were blueberry picking.
Yeah.
You know, that was just what you were doing. Rhubarb and it just so many things this time of year. But most of what we had for protein came from fishing and hunting.
Mm-hmm.
And I never really thought of it any differently. I still recall the first time. I mean, I don't know how old you are when your mind starts remembering things.
Yeah.
I'm guessing I'm 4 or 5, maybe. And we're living in this old kind of rundown house. And one afternoon, my dad comes in and he's carrying this deer and he plops it on our kitchen table. And it's already, he's already gutted it and taken all the
inside.
Everything out of the inside. But as a little kid, I'm standing there and I'm like eyeball to eyeball with this deer. And I'm touching it like any curious little kid would do. And I remember seeing it had like this bluish green kind of color in its eyes. And I started feeling like any young kid does, like, it's an emotional thing to see that. Well, my dad had those back straps off that deer, and my mom was over behind me on the stove cooking it as my dad's processing the deer. I still remember that this deer was probably alive an hour or two earlier, and there's already some of it on a cast iron skillet.
Yeah.
That's hyper local right there.
But I never really thought that was strange or different, because I could have walked over to Mac and Beverly's or Vance and Ethel's or Jim and Dolores's, and they would have probably been doing something similar to that. And so I was always excited about the idea, let's go hunt or let's go fish, because in my head, it's like, this is what we're going to eat.
Yeah.
Nobody cared about antlers. Nobody cared about anything else. They would keep them as kind of mementos, of the experience, but It wasn't, I'm going to let that one go because doesn't have big enough antlers. It's like, no, that one there, that's a nice young fat one. That one's coming home.
Yeah.
And so I just feel so blessed that that's what I grew up doing. In Minnesota, they have a fishing season that starts on Mother's Day. And so fishing season wasn't about catch and release. I did not hear about catch and release fishing until I moved out west. And the trout anglers were into that.
They're very much into that, yeah.
Yeah, the motto was, if you hook them, you cook them.
I like that. And that's a shirt right there.
Yeah.
Made it out.
My wife has a t-shirt. She has the only t-shirt that we had made for her because she loves to fish.
That's
she
so
loves
good.
to eat them. But I never really thought anything different of it. You'd go there, and if the limit was 5, you'd catch your 5 and you'd bring them home. And the rite of passage as a young guy, 10, 12, 15 years old, was if grandpa or the uncles inspected how good you were at filleting fish or cutting meat or stuff like that. And if they said, all right, Randy, you're good enough now, you can be the fish filleter. Oh my gosh, you walked up and down Main Street bragging to your buddies, I'm the fish filleter at our house. And so you didn't realize that through osmosis, you're learning so much, but you're building an ethos around wild food.
Yeah.
And how much it means to you and the appreciation for what clean air, clean water, and productive landscapes provide that to you. And so I think just by default, you become an advocate for those things because that's where you eat.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's a long answer, Poldy, to your question,
answer.
But
it's a great answer. I mean, it's really special to hear you explain that because I'm from Germany originally, and I people on the podcast know, but I grew up with hunting thankfully, because of my dad, but over there, I mean, I think I looked like 4 years ago, there's about 300,000 hunters or so in Germany.
Yeah.
85 million people.
Right.
So like I was lucky enough to get introduced to it at that young age. And, over there you can't hunt until you're 18.
Oh, wow.
But my dad always took me along, drive hunts, everything. So like I can relate to you because I was always there, like, building that ethos too.
Yeah.
And I think it really, it's so true that it's contradicting, but it's so true that once you go out there, you're killing an animal, right? You're killing a fish, but at the same time, you're building this deep appreciation for them. And the same honestly goes with plants, foraging. Like one of our good friends, Jacob, he studies Native American ethnobotany and indigenous foodways out here.
Wow.
So he was showing us some plants, that have been part of the Native American food system for thousands of years. But a lot of these plants are really sacred to Native Americans still, and there's not much information about them. So we were talking about like, is it okay or is it good to really educate a lot of people about these plant foods that have such a sacred value to these people? But, my conclusion, I think his is too, like, hey, the more people learn about these, the more they start caring again, the more maybe we get people out there who will wild tend, like what Lindy and I this year, we've been going out picking seeds from wildflowers that are edible and helping them grow, spreading them around.
Super fun.
Wow.
We're picking service berries, we're planting some,
Yeah.
And that's what Native Americans did forever. And so with that, just doing that, there's this tremendous appreciation that comes with it.
Yeah.
It's really special.
Even you talk about that emotional reconciliation that comes with taking the life of an animal. And it goes back to that story I just told you about being 4 or 5 years old. And that's when it really struck me. And here I am now, 59. When I walk up to that animal I still have this difficult reconciliation of why does it have to be that something dies so I can eat?
Right.
Yeah.
And I'll never know the answer to that why. But one thing that comes with being raised in a wild food culture is you understand the responsibility that comes with that. And with that responsibility comes maybe a sense of obligation to perpetuate it, to advocate for the whatever on that landscape provides it. And I never thought of it any differently. Everybody in our town was doing something to put back. They were planting trees, or they were doing, here's a community that depended on logging. Was their livelihood, but they're very careful about, we're only going to log whatever amount. And in the springtime, when the logging wrapped up in March, April was like tree planting month. It's like, we got to go plant trees because 100 years from now, we're going to need more trees.
Yeah.
And so even at this young age, you're like, okay, yeah, I'll go plant trees. That's what everyone else is doing. And a lot of these cultural things, I now say, well, that was pretty unique. But I often ask myself, was it that unique? There's a lot of cultures that are built on sustainability and giving back. And, the indigenous cultures that you referred to are definitely that. But I think there's a lot of rural culture that is built around that.
Yeah.
And it vests you to a level that's hard to describe to someone who hasn't had the benefit of doing that.
Yeah. And, we always say, like, it's crazy how in the last 150 years we've learned all these traditional food skills, but it's good to hear that, even when you were growing up not too long ago, there's still people out there really following those traditions. So it's not that that everyone has lost them, but I would say a lot of us have, unfortunately. And it's a big part of our mission. Like the whole mission of the podcast is build more resilient humans through food.
Yeah.
And I think, the wild food, homesteading, all that, really, these are all skills we can't lose.
Yeah. I probably told you the story about when I went off to college in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is a big town. I'm going to live in a dorm. So I show up there with a little freezer with smoked meats, cured meats, frozen meats. I'm like, what am I? And I am sure they were all polite people that didn't say this, but I'm sure in their head they're like, where did this guy come from? Doesn't he know there's a cafeteria downstairs?
Yeah, with fried chicken and chips.
Right. Yeah, the stuff that I would go there and eat it. I'm like, how do people eat this stuff?
Yeah.
Not that I never ate at restaurants or that we never ate processed food, but to make that my steady diet was that's probably what I missed. People say, oh, you leave home and you miss home. I did, but I missed the food and the natural sourced food, that grouse and walleyes and venison and berries. And, the people across the street from us, Mac and Beverly, they had a garden. I have no idea how big it was. As a little kid, it just looked like
a lot.
Huge. And my dad was a logger, so there was always this trade where he would bring them a truckload or two of birch firewood, and we'd, cut it up and split it. Well, the payment was carrots and corn and cucumbers and all the other stuff. Because my dad's like, look, I'm not I'm not a farmer. I'm a logger. But it became this, it worked within this little town. And if you plopped anyone from my generation or earlier down in this chair to talk about food, it'd be a very similar story in all those little communities out there.
That's
Definitely.
special.
I know where we grew up, my dad hunted for all of our meat. So, eating ribs at restaurants was not heard of.
Yeah.
I remember, I think we were 7 or 8 years old. My brother and I ordered ribs and took a bite and didn't want the rest at the restaurant. Like, these are terrible. They're horrible. I'm not going to name the restaurant, but they weren't very good because we were spoiled by my dad's cooking.
Right.
And the meat that we had that he would supply, we had elk every year. We had 3 freezers always full, and we had this huge garden. I was telling you before, well, our neighbors would come over when it was time to process things. And if they helped us process, they got to take a bunch of food home. So it was a good, there's no way we could have processed as much food as we grew by ourselves. But we always had a pantry of pickled beans and a little bit of everything throughout the year. So, yeah. And I didn't realize that we were spoiled by that. Until, a couple years ago when I met Poldy. I was like, oh, you guys didn't do that. That's blows my mind.
Yeah. That is a special thing about growing up in rural areas still.
Yeah.
And anyone listening who lives in the city or whatnot, you can still do a lot of these things even if you live in a city. Like me and Lindy live in an apartment right now. We're just talking before. We're calling it apartment homesteading, and there's all these things you can do. You can utilize these awesome public lands, right? Even if you don't have the land yourself. And with that also, then hopefully comes that appreciation for it and that sense of wanting to protect it. That's how it was for me coming from Germany with no public land, That's one of my favorite things in the world.
Yeah. And a lot of people have observed and they've said, Randy, you have like this missionary zeal when it comes to public lands. I do, because they've defined who I became as a person. That's where we went berry picking. That's where I went grouse hunting. The public waters is where I went fishing. Every part, if you start with food or start with, just where you're going to satisfy your curiosities, for me, it was always on public land.
Yeah.
And America without those public lands for people to go and do these things is not an America that I can envision.
Yeah.
And as long as I have platforms, I'm going to advocate for we need that.
Absolutely.
Good.
Yeah.
No, I'm happy you're one of the warriors out there doing it.
It's needed for sure.
Yeah.
It would be a real shame if we end up, like Germany, where there isn't public land, where I can just say, I'm going to go for a hike today. Yeah. I don't have to call a landowner and say, is it okay if I go for a hike today? No, I can just go.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And I hope Americans understand what a true privilege and value that is to our culture. I think Americans do have a pretty good appreciation and love for wild things and wild places. And I think it's because we have it accessible to us. Mm-hmm. No matter, I didn't have any money growing up. If it would have cost $1 a day to hunt, I wouldn't have got to hunt.
Yeah.
but having public land right out my door, if I was willing to walk a half mile, there you go.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think there's some correlation there between America's love of wild things and wild places and the fact that so many of us can go do it.
Totally. It's got to be. Yeah. You see, and there's definitely a lack of nature folks in Germany, I would say.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like they have the chance to do it, but it's not like here. Her mind was blown when like I told her how like over there, if you want to fish, you got to do a whole course. I did it when I was living there. It's like 60 hours of coursework. And it varies from state to state. Then you have to join a club, and the club leases water rights in certain areas, and then you can basically only fish there. And every catch you have to mark in a booklet, the weight, the size, the fish. And at the end of the year, you hand that booklet in, and they will look to make sure you didn't erase anything. If there's any sign of that, you get kicked out immediately.
Whoa.
So crazy.
Yeah. And you have to pay yearly.
To keep any of them to eat?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a big still culture around keeping it.
Okay.
But it's very different from here.
Yeah. The only thing that I really like about Germany is you can buy like wild boar.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting.
Wild meats.
Right.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
It's interesting. America went through this period of the commercial markets pretty much liquidating a lot of our wildlife. And so the laws came in to prevent that. But there are instances where that's not the case, like alligator.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They were on the endangered species list. And now we got so many of them that to get people to keep them at a tolerable level, they let them sell it. So we did have this historical context for why it's different than what it is in Europe. And there's people who say, you know what, we have in some places too many white-tailed deer that are damaging our forests. Well, should we be able to sell some of that?
Right.
And you want to create a big stir, propose that as a possibility. But it definitely is interesting. I've heard people say, well, I ordered elk off the menu at a restaurant. Yes, that was farmed elk. That was
from New Zealand, probably.
Right. It was not raised or not a wild elk. And then you get to explain to them that in the United States, the sale of wild game meat products is not allowed. So I don't know. I guess since that's how I was always raised, that's really where my bias is at.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I do think the fact that we do have a wild food culture, that there's a huge amount of sharing that goes on with that, which I think is another component that I really love about hunting and fishing. And a good friend of mine, Shane Mahoney, is a professor in Newfoundland, and he speaks so eloquently on this stuff. And he has a line and a statement that I always think about, of how different we are with food that we've acquired by ourselves. He said, does anybody go to the meat market and buy a pork roast and walk around the neighborhood and give part of it away?
No.
But if you go pick berries and you got some extras, or if you shoot a deer or you catch a limit of fish, oh yeah, I remember last week, the neighbors helped me out when my car broke down. I'm going to go give them, a backstrap, or I'm going to go give them 2 quarts of berries. And so there's just something different about a wild food culture and the sharing aspect of that I don't know how far back it goes, but I bet you it goes back to the first time humans put food in their mouths.
Yeah.
That's just different than the market-based way that we acquire food.
Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I know my grandparents, for one, every time we bring them any kind of wild game, they are beyond excited.
Yeah.
And just a little bit lasts them the whole year. And they're like, I've got meat for the year.
Can you imagine how they'd look at you if you said, oh, the pork roast was on sale at Costco, so here we cut a piece out for you.
They'd be like, we've already got pork roast that was on sale at Costco. Thanks.
Yeah. And for me, it's like one of my favorite things is having friends over and like cooking them, some wild game, like especially people who don't hunt.
Yeah.
getting them introduced to it like that. It is so true that, there's definitely a difference there in sharing still, and this like want to share also.
Yeah.
I like with foraging too. We've been, there's not a lot of people doing plant foraging besides like berries. So for us, it's very fun to like get all these like plants, and then people are like, wait, that's edible? And I'm like, well, once you start doing this, you'll realize that so much around you is edible. There's so much out there.
Yeah, and that's where I talk about it regularly on my podcasts and on my videos of how I wish more indigenous knowledge was implemented in all of the practices of conservation and our knowledge. As a kid, I grew up next to 2 reservations, and so I had a lot of friends who were indigenous kids, and I still remember this one is they didn't have aspirin. There's a similar thing in the willow bark,
right,
and in the bark of birch, and that's what they would use. And we'd go out and do things, and they were learning. They had learned through just being around their parents who lived as close to a subsistence lifestyle as anyone in the lower 48. So many things that I just picked up on little bits and pieces. And I'm like, dang it. I wish I would have known what they know about. They would look at that, I'd call it a brush pile, and they'd be like, oh, well, I can eat that. And yeah, we sometimes we use this, and it's knowledge you hate to see lost.
Totally.
And I'm glad people like you and others have an interest in it and are keeping it alive. But there's just so much there that we could be learning from. And if anyone doubts that, I say, well, here in the North American continent, however far back you want to go to the Clovis people, 10, 20,000 years, they lived sustainably off these landscapes. Mm-hmm. And it was only in the last 150 years that we managed to screw that up.
Yeah.
So they had something figured out.
They did. Yeah.
Absolutely.
We should be learning from that instead of ridiculing it or discounting it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a really good book called Ancestral Appetites that I was reading, and it's all about, how so much of human culture revolved around food and the knowledge sharing and passing that food knowledge on and on and on throughout the generations, hundreds of thousands of years. And then it's kind of crazy that just stopped almost, besides some rural communities like where you grew up. But so it is important, I think. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a growing interest again. And even,
bringing it back.
Yeah. And it's not like everyone needs to go and grow a giant garden. Like, just do a little more of it.
Right.
Grow some appreciation around it. Teach someone else, and then that's how we keep that stuff alive.
I mean, having a dinner party and saying, I just went out and picked all these greens for the salad, that's so much cooler than going to Walmart and picking greens,
Yeah, it is.
It feels better.
It does, but it creates conversation, and it causes people to ask questions. And then you get the opportunity to explain, well, I grew up doing this, and this is just part of what I do. I pick my own greens, and like, whoa, I could do that. So I think all of this with media platforms like your podcast and the platforms that so many of us are lucky to have, those are opportunities to give a voice to that wild food idea. And people are really, really receptive to it.
Yeah.
If they're shown of it and get a chance to experience it and eat a wild salad.
Yeah.
Or whatever it might be.
I think it's just literally like there's a thing in your brain that turns on,
Absolutely. Yeah, it's, you pick up a container of wild blueberries in quotes, from the store.
Yeah.
You eat a handful of those and you go pick your own wild blueberries and you just can't stop eating them.
Yeah.
There's a big difference.
Yeah.
It feels so good.
I am such a snob about that, especially when it comes to wild rice. So we used to go, everyone, at least when I was growing up in northern Minnesota, you'd go help with the wild rice.
Oh,
harvest.
that's awesome. I've always wanted to do that.
Yeah, that's a big goal.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
But there's still people back there who do it. My brother's father-in-law does it, and he knows I'm just I didn't know what white rice was. Till I went to college, I don't know that I've eaten white rice.
Wow.
And so you go to some of these stores, some of these food co-ops or wherever, it'll say, wild rice on sale or wild rice, whatever. And you go in there and I can instantly tell you if that's hand harvested or if that's patty rice. Patty rice is like a derogatory term in northern Minnesota. No one, no self-respecting person is going to eat patty rice. So I love it. I will pay the extra amount for the hand harvested stuff. A lot of the indigenous people still do that. Like I said, my brother
have stands, right? They'll have stands.
Yeah.
You can go like farm stands.
Oh yeah. And everyone knows the gift for Randy. If you're wondering what to get him for his birthday, just send him some hand harvested, hand parched wild rice.
You've heard it here, folks.
Yeah. So how are you using that wild rice? Like, what's your favorite?
My wife makes a wild rice soup that if we would probably make wild rice, natural hand-picked wild rice, extinct if she started selling it. It's that good. Wild rice meatballs, wild rice sausage. I forgot how much I like wild rice meat sausage till I was back for a wedding last week, and they had sausage with wild rice in it. Mm-hmm. And it's you grind up the sausage and you put it in the case, but you put wild rice and cheddar in there. Oh man, you sit down and say, okay, I can't eat just one. It was the stuffing that you put in waterfowl. It was, just so many
Thanksgiving
ways.
turkey, I assume.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, every side dish, a lot of people, America, I guess it's mashed potatoes, right? Mm-hmm. Or fries or something. Not where I grew up. It was wild rice in some way, shape, or form. Mm. And, if you go to my house right now in the pantry, there's never less than 5 pounds of wild rice.
Awesome.
Hand-picked wild rice.
I love that.
So when you were talking about the blueberries, Lindy, I'm like, I am such a snob about that. I've actually been in stores and people try to peddle me on, oh no, this is wild rice. I'm like, no, it's not. Look at this. Dude, you can tell by looking at the kernels. It's shorter. It's never going to fill out the way wild rice does. And sorry, I'll keep shopping.
And for people that don't know, you go out in like a canoe, right?
Right.
And you have a blanket.
Mm-hmm. You have a mat in the bottom of your canoe. And you usually have somebody in the front of the canoe who's pulling the canoe or paddling the canoe forward, and then the person in the back has 2 long poles. They lean the ripe stalks over the side of the boat. So the heads of the rice now are over the top of the boat, the canoe, and you hit them with the other stick, and anything that's ripe falls off down into the bottom on your mat.
Yeah.
And then you let them stand back up, and the ones that were still green stay attached.
Right.
And so you just keep doing that, and pretty soon you look, it's like, well, I got a lot of wild rice in the bottom of the canoe here. I don't know that I can eat that much. But by the time you go and you husk it, you do everything, you end up with less than you think. But it's still a big traditional thing back there, less so than it used to be. But again, that's something that I thought, in September, everybody's out getting wild rice. I had an uncle that he did a lot of it. And so kind of the whole family ended up with wild rice.
Yeah.
Get to college and everyone's again like, what's going on?
Yeah. This guy eats wild rice. He doesn't eat white rice. You guys
met wild rice guy?
Yeah. And I didn't realize until I left there how weird I probably am. My mom ended up, when I think I was 14, she bought the little diner in town. And they serve burgers and conventional food, but I still was always eating the wild stuff. And so it's not like I didn't have access to a burger or whatever, but deep fried potatoes? Who thought that was a good, that's, to this day, I don't, people are like, well, you want some fries? No.
Yeah.
Yeah. They don't make you feel good. That's
no, you eat like one, you're like, oh, that's good. In a second, you're like, I really don't need this.
Yeah.
And when people say you want a burger, in my head, I'm like, oh yeah, I got some ground moose in the fridge. Yeah, I want a burger.
Moose burger is the best.
Oh, wait a second. This is probably some high fat content from a supermarket.
Yeah. That's been dyed red.
Yeah. So I'll be polite and I'll eat it. But it's like, you kind of are rubbing your tongue on the roof of your mouth. Like, what? That is the most. I can see why you guys use condiments.
Yeah.
Because that's the only flavor that was there is the condiment.
I mean, to me, store-bought meat almost always tastes like day-old, like reheated nasty.
Yeah.
Like it shouldn't be eaten. Yeah. Yeah. Almost always, unless you really season it.
Yeah. And, I don't eat condiments. People think I'm crazy. But I don't care what wild food it is, wild meats. The flavors are so rich and so varied, almost varied by landscape and by time of the year and everything. That's part of what I grew up kind of sorting out and when I'm eating something, I don't want everything to taste like bland chicken or bland beef.
Generic, yeah.
That you got to put so much pucky. In our family, condiments are called pucky. You got to put so much pucky on there that it tastes like pucky.
Yeah, that's so true. And that is kind of interesting how you just said like different seasons. I mean, that is very true for, I think, I've yet to shoot a bear, but I've heard that the bear is in the fall, with eating the berries and whatnot, it definitely, the fat looks different. There's a different flavor there.
Worlds of difference.
Yeah.
And a spring bear is going to be leaner. Especially out west where they have a higher portion of carcass and meat in their diet compared to the Midwest where it's mostly plant and berries and such. You shoot a bear out here in the springtime, and if just before going into the den they ate elk gut pile, they're going to be pretty strong because most of their fat has dissipated. They've lived on that over the winter, even though they're in a hibernation mode. Whereas you shoot one in September when they're in the choke cherries or the huckleberries here, and it's like, oh my gosh, get out of my way. I want some of that.
Yeah.
I'm happy I didn't shoot a spring bear now. Still got a tag. So.
Yeah, if you got a black bear tag in Montana and you're looking for the meat, make sure and save it for September.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big goal for us, just for the lard mainly. We want to render it.
And that's the other part. This time of year, they'll have that much fat on their rump.
That is ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas you get them in April, they haven't had the whole summer to build that back up.
Do you use wild game fat like from deer and elk?
I don't. I have not figured out how to use ungulate fat.
Is it a texture thing for you or
it is a texture thing, and it gets maybe there's a way to store it and freeze it, but it almost gets rancid when you freeze it, and it gets a really foul taste to me. So I trim all that fat. And again, this gets back to my buddy Peter, who is a tribal member. Anything that wasn't part of the animal. My dad was the same way also. My dad did not eat liver and kidney.
Really?
He purposefully would open the chest cavity and hang it in a tree for the Canadian jays. He's like, they need something too. And he would do the same thing with a lot of the fat.
Yeah.
And so I never, I didn't grow up eating it and utilizing that. And some people would be like, well, you could. Yeah, I know I could. But in my dad's tradition, it was an offering to the other animals.
Right. Other creatures of the forest.
Yeah, because his theory always was if you don't hang it out there in a tree, the bears and the other scavengers are going to get it and the birds won't get it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So he justified that he was taking care of his bird friends.
Some people's minds are probably blown that there's birds out there getting that. I mean, because they're not. Are you talking about birds of prey or?
No, I'm talking about. A lot of people think songbirds. Eat just seeds. This is one thing that a lot of people I've seen do with animal fat, deer fat, elk fat, is they will take their bird seed and they build like these little donuts of
the balls,
fat, and they'll put that in their bird feeder.
Mm-hmm.
And that is such high energy for those birds, especially in cold northern climates. We got some birds that try to hang around here. They need a lot of energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I saw people utilizing their fat for that way for songbirds.
That's cool.
I know this year we want to try to render it all down and do a lot of body lotions.
Yeah.
And
Lindy
we do
made her
soaps and
first
stuff too.
soap and sunscreen out of beef tallow recently.
Worked
so
great.
I'm going to try to do it with deer and see how that goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, the differences in the fat of beef versus ungulates is how beef fat marbles inside the meat. And it cooks differently inside the meat. Whereas ungulates, it's not quite that way. And if you don't do it right, it can burn at a very low temperature and get it. Just when people say, boy, that was really gamey. I don't know what the term gamey means, but you hear it a lot.
Yeah.
I think it's because they probably had too much fat on that elk or deer or whatever, and it burned
or oxidized or something like that in the freezer.
Yeah. Whereas bear, not being an ungulate, that's about as fine a fat as you could ever ask for.
Right.
And it's so easy to render and utilize. We got some in the kitchen studio over there.
That's so cool.
Jealous. Good stuff.
Just at work,
Yeah. It's a good place to work, guys.
Yeah. Marcus, who worked for us, he is just so handy with all that stuff. He'll render down anything and everything. Like we were just up in Alaska in May, and one of our guys, Jace, took a bear, and right there the next day we rendered a bunch of fat, and we were eating that bear right there
immediately. I mean, in its fat.
Yeah. Who wants to eat a dehydrated meal when you got
fresh meat,
bear fat and bear meat right there?
Yeah.
Totally.
Oh yeah, we were swelled up like wood ticks, man.
I bet.
We're all like, I didn't have to eat that much. But
yeah, we're excited. Hopefully this year we'll get a fall bear here. That'll be pretty sweet.
Yeah.
So staying along the lines of, eating animals, what are your top 3 wild animals to eat?
Pronghorn is number 1, and pronghorn is number 2, and pronghorn's number 3.
Okay, good answer.
Very
antelope for me too, hands down.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you understand why that is? I have no idea why it has this sweet, almost a sweet flavor to it. The texture's so smooth. The only downside is they're small.
Yeah,
right, you don't get a lot.
Yeah, if I have a pronghorn in my freezer, it doesn't last 4 or 5 weeks.
Wow.
It is like gone.
Yeah.
And I tell people I would trade you, even though an elk is going to yield you, 160 to 200 pounds of meat, and a pronghorn is going to yield you about 30 pounds, 40 pounds if it's a big one. I would trade you that 40 pounds of pronghorn for that 180 pounds of elk. Yeah. That's how much I love pronghorn.
Wow. Yeah, I've had the pleasure now to live out here for 3 years and go beyond. I started with roe deer in Germany, and then white-tailed deer, and then elk and pronghorn. And for me too, pronghorn hands down the best. And everything I heard at the beginning was like, don't even try, or go for you go hunt them for the bucks. And I've only shot does so far the last 2 years, and I love them. I don't know. Is it maybe I've heard that it could people think negatively about the meat because they tend to hunt them in warmer weather, shoot them, don't gut them, just kind of toss them in their truck.
Yeah. I tell people I've heard that so many times about pronghorn. And if you took me, my wife, and my son, and the number of pronghorn that have come through our freezers, we have never had one piece of pronghorn that was anything other than excellent. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, that's probably 50 or 60 pronghorn over the last 30 years.
That's a good case study.
Yeah. Maybe I've just been lucky. But I've talked to other people who are really fanatic about pronghorn meat like I am, and they say the same thing. Never had a bad one. And so when someone says that, I'm with you. I think it's how it gets taken care of from the minute it's shot. And I say, okay, you got the world's greatest line of beef cattle here, and you got this steer calf. He's 5 months old and he weighs 350 pounds. You walk over there and you shoot him, and you let him lay there in the dirt for a while, and you let him bloat up, and you go down to the bar and have a few beers while the sun beats on him. you don't take the hide off them. And when you do, you drag it around in the dirt a little bit. And then you hang it in your garage, which is not a controlled temperature setting, for 3 or 4 days. And finally, you get around to cutting it up. You think that premium line of beef steer is going to be very good? No. And so I think it's that warm weather you're talking about. I think it's that some people just don't know how to take care of meat.
Yeah, I was told early on that, like, got them right away and, like, ideally skin them, but don't let the skin touch the meat again. I don't know if there's anything to it. That's what I've done, and it's tasted great so far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've had no problems there.
Yeah. I just say get the hide off and cool it as quick as you can.
Yeah.
And then process it whenever you can. If you are going to let it age, make sure you have a controlled setting temperature. A lot of people are like, oh, I hang it in my garage. It didn't age well. Well, no, because when the sun comes up and it's 70 degrees out, your garage warms up too warm.
More than 70, yeah.
And then at night, when the temperature drops to 30, okay, that was okay. Somewhere in there, you hit the right temperature range. But there's a lot of times you're not in the right temperature range. Right. So if people are going to age that, have a walk-in cooler or, put parts of it in a refrigerator at the proper setting, whatever you're going to do. But yeah, I think most every piece of wild meat is premium A++ quality. It's us who mess it up and make it something less than that.
Yeah. And like, especially with the ungulates, the ruminants, you like never see I've never seen parasites. Rarely. Have you ever experienced any? I mean, you've taken a lot of animals.
No. If I've seen some ticks on some of them, but no, I've never seen a parasite. Moose, I take that back. I took a moose that had a lot of parasites in the meat, but they're, you Google it and it's like, oh, these aren't.
Where was it? The little white caps?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
My friend had that on one elk too, but he said it's often in waterfowl and I don't know.
Yeah, but on that moose, you Google that and they're like, no, they have this and it's not at all harmful to humans. Right. You don't even taste it when you eat it. Yeah. So I have seen that on a moose.
I feel like it's very rare. Yeah.
Yeah. I've only seen some pretty serious maggots on a little buck I shot, but he'd been chewed on by some coyotes pretty hard. So yeah,
that would be a piece that you'd want to carve away.
His whole body was pretty bad.
Dang.
Yeah, he ended up being coyote bait. It was the last day and he was hurting.
Yeah.
So it was more of a mercy thing and take him home with my tag,
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's a reminder of how our human comforts don't apply to the natural world.
Right.
Definitely not.
Think about how long that young deer suffered with that. And as Aldo Leopold wrote somewhere in one of his essays of, humans are the only people provided enough luxury and privilege to feel sorry about the death of an animal. Yep. And I'm glad we do. I think that's part of the human condition. But the rest of the living beings out there, they don't get that chance to think about it. And it's tough.
It's a good reminder. Yeah, that's powerful stuff.
Are there any cuts of wild game that you think are either over or underrated?
Oh, definitely heart is so underrated.
Oh, I'm happy you said that.
I was wondering. You said no liver or kidneys, but...
Right. So if somebody, and I'm out there helping them or whatever, and if a heart has a bullet hole through it, probably a lot of bloodshot. There might be some lead fragments or something. I'm probably not going to worry about it. But if I'm watching and somebody chucks their heart over in the snow, I'm like, can I go get that? Yeah. Sure enough. My son, when we moved to Bozeman when he was a year old, 33 years ago, and when I would come home from hunting, get one, Dad? Did you get one? And if I got one, can we eat the heart? Right then and there is like, stop what I'm doing and start cutting up the heart, fry it real rare in some butter, maybe a little bit of garlic or something, And we would sit there, and that little guy would eat so much deer heart. It was just amazing. But
That's
I
awesome.
talked to a lot of people like, oh, I don't like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really?
But why?
It's
Did
a
you
muscle.
try it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've actually, there's some elk heart in this freezer right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how it's lasted this long.
Yeah.
We love organ meats too. Like we keep all of them. I mean, heart and liver definitely we use the most, but
I don't like kidney.
Lindy didn't like the kidney I
Yeah.
made for her
Nope.
Mhm.
that much, but there's ways to soak it in salt and milk and bring it through a process to make it taste pretty good. There's definitely good nutrients in there.
Mhm.
Lots of good nutrients into organs in general.
Yeah.
And kind of just waste it unless you're doing something like an offering like your dad, intentionally. I think it's pretty wasteful to leave it in the woods.
Mhm.
And
It's a good chunk of meat on some animals.
Yeah.
an elk, I'm always
Like a moose
surprised.
liver.
Oh yeah, we got
Oh,
a moose
boy.
liver from a friend.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like part of a moose liver,
Yeah.
and we're like slapping on the table.
It
I'm
was
like, wow.
giant.
Yeah.
And it's
Amazing.
so
Yeah.
mild.
Yeah.
Yeah, moose liver's good.
I almost need to go back to one of your prior questions when I said antelope. I've been lucky to draw 3 free-range bison tags.
Oh.
One in Montana, one in Wyoming, and one in Utah. If you get a chance to eat wild bison, you will become an advocate for them, if for no other reason than the food source of it. Not only is it unbelievable, the fat on it is fine. It's different than elk fat or deer fat. It is it's like a great big pronghorn. It has a sweeter taste to it. It has this really fine, soft fabric to the meat. And here's the other good part. The flank muscle that is so small on a deer that it's really hard to do much with other than trim.
Mm-hmm.
With a bison, it becomes its own big cut of meat.
Yeah,
You do a rib roll on a bison,
that's some good stuff.
you better have a really big grill that you're going to roast that rib roll on, because by the time you're done, it's going to be this big around and about 3 feet long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
You can see why it was such an important food source
Oh,
back in the day, right?
yeah, and then I got the hide stand, and I try to utilize everything.
Yeah,
The skulls, the antlers, the horns, the hides, you name it. I try to keep it all. Well, if you went and laid on one of those bison hides I have tanned, you would realize how easy it would be to go sleep out here when it was 0 degrees. If you had one hide underneath you and one on top of you, you'd probably have to roll part of it off to not sweat
Wow.
at night.
Yeah.
It's
I've
really,
never heard anyone say that.
it's been a fascinating experience for me. Actually, next Tuesday, I'm doing a podcast with 2 other guys who have had similar luck in free range bison. And we're doing a podcast because we want to advocate for why are we treating bison the way we do?
Mm-hmm.
Bison were the sacrificial lamb that brought the conservation ethos to the United States, and we can't treat them any better than we do.
Right.
Yep.
If every American got to taste one steak of free-range bison, there'd be people in Congress lobbying for the cause of bison every day.
Yeah. And we need to. I think at one point they were down to 1,000 bison in the U.S. or something crazy like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, people say, oh, there's bison farms everywhere. Well, those aren't pure bison. There's a lot of cattle genetics in there. I just have felt so lucky that I got to do that. And I wish I had some left to send home with you, because I share a lot of that because I'm trying to make advocates. I want everyone to be a bison advocate. And if they ate it, they would become a bison advocate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know how many free range bison there are now on the landscape?
If
Roughly.
now we have wild herds in Alaska, quite a few in the provinces of the Yukon, Alberta. We have South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, Arizona. I think that covers them all. As far as total numbers, I don't know. If I had to guess, it's probably 40 or 50,000 of true free range, genetically pure bison.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. We were going to have Matt from North Bridger Bison on the podcast in August, and I was just doing research on him and listened to one of the podcasts that he'd been on. And he was saying that at one point their numbers got so low that I think the Smithsonian Museum or one of the big museums, they sent out two biologists to go kill two to put into their museum because they're like, we won't have any more of these.
Right. No, they were, William Hornaday is who they sent out here. And he hunted between the Yellowstone and the Missouri River, and he found them and he shot them. Like back in the day, it's like, well, we better go collect some specimens because they're going to be extinct. And if we want people to ever know what was here, we better go get some and taxidermy them. So he did that, and they sat in either the Museum of Natural History or one of the Smithsonian's. Now they're sitting in a museum in Fort Benton, Montana.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's kind of neat.
Yeah.
Good change of events.
I mean, definitely bison's such an awesome animal, and elk too, you know. Elk has really grown on me because mostly for the food aspect. Like I've only shot a cow. Lindy got her first cow last year, and it's just so special. You know, you shoot one animal and we eat a lot of meat, but most people can eat a whole year, you know, on one animal. And I was just curious, do you see any threat to the elk populations, or is there anything that should be on top of mind for hunters, you know, our generation, to make sure that we can continue to hunt elk for generations to come?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is habitat.
Yeah.
Quality of habitat. We have the human impacts of development, usurping the winter range, because a lot of elk are migratory, and you can have the best summer range in the world up in the high country, but if you constrain them all to very small winter ranges, that's all you're going to have is however many that winter range can support. A lot of our landscapes are heavily impacted by invasive plant species. So we used to really cherish when a fire would come across the landscape, because this natural regenerative process brings a lot of nutrition back for wild things. Well, now the non-natives are out competing the native plants. So that's a huge issue for the future of elk. So when I say habitat, I'm talking about a lot of things. Habitat makes elk more resilient to predation, and I mean predation from humans or from natural predators. If you want to get back to, again, Aldo Leopold's land ethic, everything about wildlife management, wildlife sustainability starts with the foundation of the productivity of the land. And that is what I talk about for the most part when I say habitat. I think that's our biggest danger for all of our wild things, is making sure that we have the habitat that they need.
Yeah. Is there anything actionable that people can do now already?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. There's a group that advocates strictly for elk, the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. I think they've been around 40 years. I think they're getting close to 9 million acres of habitat that they've improved for elk and other wildlife. That's one thing. There's a lot of volunteer projects out there. Your wildlife agency or some of the nonprofit conservation groups will have projects where you can go pull fence that allow these migrations to happen, and things that aren't going to constrain them to, certain habitat types. If there's things you can do to not degrade habitat. In other words, if you're out hiking or whatever, make sure you're not spreading the seed. You're talking about seeds, right?
Yeah.
The seeds of all that, we call them the hitchhikers, right? They get on our clothing or on our boots or on our vehicles. And okay, there was never any cheatgrass in Montana.
Right.
Well,
that stuff's
there's
nasty.
a whole lot now.
Yeah. How did it get here? On the boots, on the clothing, and on the vehicles of humans.
Yeah.
Because it was just mostly isolated to some small bands originally in Oregon and Idaho and Nevada. Now it's coming across the West, and elk can only utilize that for maybe a week or 10-day period in the spring.
Yeah, when it's nice and green.
After that, done. So we have huge amounts of habitat that are being usurped by these invasive species. So when you ask what can you do actionable, don't let the hitchhikers get a free ride.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of things that if anyone looks very closely, they'll find ways to do that for elk or for whatever wildlife they're connected to.
Yeah, spread the native seeds, not the invasive.
There you go. Yeah.
Elect native, destroy invasive.
There you go. That, with every hunting license, they ought to give you a pound of native grass seed.
That's right. Just sprinkle it.
I thought about it for trailheads, hikers. They're all over the place. If they just took one pouch and spread it as they went,
the other week,
you'd have so many more seeds from native plants.
Yeah, at each trailhead, with an explanation and here you go.
Yeah, and shows you, what noxious weeds maybe you could see and pull on your way up.
Yeah,
so many kids loving to do that. I bet.
Yeah, I mean the amount of weeds that I pull when I'm out there. I'm like, I hate these things. I'm out there pulling, and I'm sure people hiking by are like, "What's that guy's
this
problem?"
Guy's losing it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not like my little bit of weed pulling now and then is going to make a difference. But the point of that is, we have large landscapes that used to be premium elk habitat that are losing their value as elk habitat.
Okay.
And it loses value as cattle habitat and everything as well.
Right.
I mean, bird dogs, you have to be careful in cheatgrass because it gets embedded in their skin. You've got infections. $5,000 later, well, now it's out of their ear.
So even if you don't hunt and you have dogs, this should be on top of mind for you.
Yeah, you go out with a curly-haired dog in cheatgrass country, you better be ready.
Comb that thing out.
Yeah.
Before you go home.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, we ran into that. We've been getting into bird hunting a bit more. But we have a dog called Waffles.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kind of dog is it?
He's a chocolate lab.
Oh, okay.
A pointing lab. And he's actually, he's doing it. He's pointing. We had a dog trainer for hunting for summer school for a little bit.
Yeah, it was a very short.
It was short.
Dog training lesson.
Yeah.
But we did a lot of the beginning work and just had a little foundation work and have taken over the rest of the training. So it's very fun.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
We had a chocolate lab for a while. Her name was Copper.
That's a good name.
What a great companion. But loved to hunt birds, loved the water.
Oh yeah.
And she lived to be 12, and they were 12 great years. She got to hunt a lot.
Yeah.
So,
well, I know you're extremely passionate about one of the wild birds out there, the grouse.
Yes.
What about these little birds living in the pine forest?
Yeah.
Gets you so excited about them.
It's I don't know how much time we have to explain it. My wife pointed this out to me. She grew up in Pittsburgh via Las Vegas, or the other way around. We met in Nevada, but she loves to hunt birds. She's seen my passion for wild food, and now she's all about it also. And one day we're sitting on a tailgate. We're in a mountain range not far from here, and we'd shot a couple rough grouse. And she said something to the effect of, "I can see why you're so passionate about these and why they mean so much to you." I'm like, "Oh, why is that?" We've been married maybe 10 years. I'm like, I need to lay down on the couch. I'm going to be psychoanalyzed here.
Yeah.
And she's like, "Well, when your parents got divorced when you were 10, you went out grouse hunting as your way to get away from the world." Huh. All of a sudden, she put together the critical pieces of the puzzle. And I got to thinking about it. It's like, yep. That was, growing up and being the oldest of three and my parents going through a messy divorce, all the things I was taught for 10 years of this is how cult society works and religion works and da-da-da, it all went away in the course of 6 months. But when I went out in the woods and I went and chased grouse, everything made sense again.
Yeah.
And then my dad was out of the picture for a while, so my mom was trying to raise 3 kids as a waitress in a little diner, and it was not going well. And I remember when I would come home with a rough grouse, she would make such a production over it. And I don't know if she was just trying to make me feel good as a 11-year-old, 12-year-old? Or I think it was really because, guess what? No bologna sandwiches tonight.
Yeah.
Man.
We get to eat a wild chicken.
That's
Yeah.
right. Forest chicken.
Right.
Yeah.
And so growing up in a culture that is about grouse hunting, like northern Minnesota is, that's part of it. But I think where it really became a part of inside of me was what my wife pointed out. And I felt stupid that here I am 40 years old before someone connects the dots for me.
Mhm.
But she was 100% correct. There's a personal reason for it, but there's also the food reason
The
for
food.
it.
Mhm.
And what's the number one way to cook it for Randy Newberg?
Oh, with rough grouse, do not overcomplicate it.
Yeah.
Maybe, and make your own mix or rub or whatever you want to call it. Maybe a little lemon pepper, a little paprika, maybe even a touch of cayenne, some thyme, maybe some basil. But don't overdo it. It is so rich with flavors that if you go soak it in one of these, things you buy.
Marinades.
Yeah. It's like, that's for chicken.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
for chicken that they raise by the millions.
That has no flavor.
Right. It tastes like shredded cardboard for a reason.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't get to live a wild life eating
True.
berries and insects and tree buds and everything else.
And grouse wurthelberries.
Oh,
Yeah.
those are the
Yeah.
best.
If you
Yeah.
know about those.
Yeah.
Oh, rose hips. When the rose hips dry out in October in Minnesota, you're hunting grouse, but you're really looking for rose hips.
Rose hips, yeah. We
Because-
still have to get into those.
Yeah, that's where all the grouse are at that time of year. Anyhow, don't overdo it. Don't complicate it. Make it simple. Make sure you salvage the legs, because a lot of people are like, oh, the legs are kind of sinewy. Yeah, they are a little bit, but if you don't overcook them, you can just pull it right off.
Are you just searing them up, or are you adding a little liquid in?
A little bit of like olive oil or whatever oil, because you don't have to cook it at a really high temperature.
Right.
So you can use one of the oils that if it's something you got to cook really high,
Mhm.
olive oil, and some of those will burn at a low temperature.
Smoke point. Yeah.
Yeah. So just it's
Keep it
so
simple.
simple. I do it at camp
Yeah.
with a little 6-inch, and not even a skillet. It's a backcountry pan. And my crew has grown to appreciate. I got any grouse today, Randy?
I love that.
So yeah, I'm known to be the guy who we're in pursuit of an elk and I see a grouse. It's like, that elk can wait.
Yeah.
We're going
Yeah.
He's
this way.
feeding.
Yeah.
This thing can fly.
Right.
Yeah.
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 And, grouse are very, like all of the birds, they're very prolific, that in good conditions, you're not going to overharvest them.
Right.
Uh,
I feel
so-
like this year, just from even in town looking around, there's a lot of birds. I don't know if it's going to be a good year, but I have a feeling it's going to be a good year.
There's so much food out there for
Yeah.
them right now.
Yeah.
Mild winter. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And when you get a good amount of cover, the chicks will survive and won't get predated on as heavily.
Mm-hmm.
And that also allows a lot of insects to survive, which is what those chicks are eating when they're first getting going.
right.
So I hope you're right. I hope there's grouse on every stump.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Us too.
But
And
no, it's stuff like that I just love the flavor that grouse has. If you lined up 1,000 plates of bird meat and it was 999 chickens and one grouse, all cooked the right way, I would pick out which one of those are grouse if you let me taste them all.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to do that. Have you done that video yet? That'd be great.
Yeah.
we have done taste tests.
Yeah.
That'd be a great taste
We've
test.
done wild game taste tests, and the crew is like, you'll never get them all right. I'm like, yeah, I will. I got caribou correct. I got moose correct. I got pronghorn correct. And then they tricked me. They had whitetail and mule deer, and I had to tell the difference between the two. And I had them right to start with. And at the last minute, I'm like, based on texture, I think that might have been a mule deer rather than a whitetail. Well, then come to find out, it was an old whitetail buck and a young mule deer doe.
Oh,
So
Smart.
But they were like, "Oh, you could tell that." I'm like, "Yes, if you don't cook it within an inch of its life and you leave the flavors in there,
You don't use condiments.
Yeah.
Right.
Pucky, right?
makes
Pucky.
a
No
big difference.
pucky.
Yeah, that pucky.
Yeah.
you can do it."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe I'm just getting old, but I feel so many people have been deprived of these flavors.
Mm-hmm.
These are flavors you are not going to get in any other food.
Yeah.
Absent or unless you spice it and rub it and marinate it and everything. You don't need to do that with these wild foods.
Yeah.
They're so full of flavors
Yep.
that are unique.
Mm-hmm.
Just cook it right.
Yeah.
Or don't. I even tried, I met Danielle Pruitt once, and she brought Axis backstrap.
I've
And I
heard
was
that.
like-
I've not had it, but I've heard it's
It was
great.
so good. And I'm like, Danielle, can I just slice a piece off and eat it raw? And she's like, sure, I've done it. I'm like, I tried that, and it was like sushi.
Really?
Such good flavor. Yeah.
Huh.
It was
I've never
really
done
good.
that. I've not
Yeah.
got that courage yet.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it wasn't an issue at all. That's one thing for the grouse. Do you keep it a little bit pink?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, a grouse, especially when you put it in there and let it get to a temperature, when you take it off, it's still going to do a little bit of cooking while it's sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, it's like, you could play hockey with that thing. Or
Yeah.
use it as a rubber ball. It's like, no, you should go to jail for cooking
Yeah.
a grouse like
Straight to
that.
jail.
Yeah. So I would make it on the rare side
Mm-hmm.
as a precaution. And I can always, if it's like, maybe a little more, maybe another minute,
Yeah.
I can always put it back.
Right.
Yeah. It's much easier to put it back than to
You can't undo
take it away.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why most people who say, I don't really care for wild game. Well, you tried to cook it like grandma cooked pork, right? Back in the day, you got to cook pork to 1600 degrees to make sure you don't get trichinosis. No, grandma. And so they cook wild game like they're trying to kill everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, don't do that. That's why you don't like it.
Yeah.
I posted a picture on my X account of a really raw elk steak, and everyone was like, I would never eat elk dead raw, ever. I'm like, why not? They're like
Yeah.
parasites. I'm like, I've never seen a parasite.
Yeah.
You know?
Never had a
Yeah.
problem.
No, I'll take my chances.
Same.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah, especially if it's an elk that I know I've processed and
Yeah.
taken care
That's
of.
a big thing.
Our roadkill elk was a little bit more on the well done side. I'd say, but
It fed us
everything
well, though.
fresh harvested has
Fed us
been.
well. It was a good road. Yeah.
It was a
roadkill
good
elk.
roadkill, but
Yeah.
still.
Well, Randy, I love how it seems like for cooking for you is a very, like, you focus on the simplicity of it all and the true flavors. That's totally my ethos to my philosophy. My buddy Hayden always says when I make food, it's like a caveman made an acai bowl. And I thought it fits so well.
It was so funny.
Yeah. But it is true. It's like, keep it simple, like put weird things together and
Yeah.
it'll taste good.
He's got bananas in the meat bowl.
Some-
We don't know what's going
sometimes.
on.
Sometimes.
It's a whole process.
Oh, no, my wife, a lot of times, will take some of the leftover, some people call them, in a turkey, you call it drippings, right?
Yeah.
And she will use that with the wild rice that she makes.
Oh,
Yeah.
She'll take
sounds good.
and mix the two. And it's like, oh man, I already ate that steak, but that wild rice, I'm going to eat that whole bowl.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm sure I'm a weird duck, and the world is probably saying I've dropped on my head too many times as a youngster, but it's just how I've grown up, and I've really
Yeah.
come to appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I think you should look at it as a very special thing, and
Yeah.
hopefully more people in the, going forward can
Embrace their
embrace,
weird.
embrace
know?
that and just experience it, even
Yeah.
if it's just a little bit. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we want to respect your time. It's been
Oh.
really, really fun.
Yeah,
Lindy,
this
is
has
there
been
any
great.
more questions you were burning to ask, Randy?
The only thing is your freezer,
Yeah.
Yeah.
whether or not you vacuum seal or if you wrap everything
Yes.
or if you have it processed somewhere.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Most of my stuff, and this is if we go do a tour of the kitchen studio.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah. all these companies send us like really high quality food processing stuff, like vacuum sealers and all. So I do that. I do vacuum sealing mostly because it's just really convenient.
Yep.
And you got to be aware that, this is a vacuum seal. It's putting pressure on the container. So if you just throw it in your freezer and you bang it around, you might puncture that plastic.
Right.
And then you might end up with some freezer burn. I grew up doing it all with wax paper.
Yep.
Right.
Me too.
Wrap it in saran wrap or whatever, and then wrap it in wax paper. And by the time you were 5, you knew how to fold and roll and
keep
grab
it
a
tight.
piece of freezer tape. And,
Yeah.
I known that vacuum sealers when I was growing up. So, and then as far as my own food, how I process it, one of the things I regret about how busy we are producing content in this narrow window of hunting season,
right,
is how I don't get to process every one of my own animals. I do as many as I can. And this goes back to growing up. That was the biggest part. That was it. My family, my dad, my uncles, the neighbors made a bigger deal about processing the meat than actually getting the deer.
Yeah.
And that was something that you didn't just let some hack take care of the meat. This is like reserved for the guy who really knows what he's doing, which in my mind was, whoa, this is serious stuff.
Yeah.
This is not to be taken lightly. And so as you grow up, okay, Randy, you get to run the grind. Don't get your finger in there, all the things. And you get to do this part and you get to do that part. But that's a big part for me that I could stand there. If you told me we are going to have a 3-month meat cutting party, I'd be there every day for the meat cutting party.
You got to come to Lindy's. Lindy's dad has a
sausage fest.
He does a yearly sausage fest.
Yeah.
Invites the family, makes merch around it.
Yeah,
Really?
I've got a growler at home and stickers to put on the car, t-shirts.
He's got the setup for it,
Cool.
Shout out to my dad.
It's a big thing in their family. I'm honored to be part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just
fun.
As I look at it now, to me that was just, hey, this is what we're going to eat for the next year. We got to take good care of it. But now I realize how much emphasis was placed on that, which created this sense of value to what this life of this animal became. That I'm really grateful that I got to do that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And my wife knows that if you told me, hey, you could go, out for a big fancy event, or you could stay home and cut up a deer. I'm cutting up a deer. I have way more fun cutting up a deer than going to some sporting event or a concert or whatever.
Right.
So
there's no better feeling than slowly seeing that freezer get like more stacked and more stacked.
Yeah. And I saw something the other day that, when we just did this, we did a video on it about how I saw this and how it kind of disturbed me. And some guys were talking about, after a year, I just throw it out. It's not good after that.
Yeah.
I'm like, whoa, what? Hold on. So I told the crew, I'm going to go find the oldest thing that might be in a dark corner of one of my freezers. And I found a Coues deer backstrap from December of 2020. So 3.5 years.
Yeah.
I don't know how it got there, because if I would have known it was there, it would have got eaten within a week.
Yeah.
But somehow I found it, and I'd done it through, wax paper. And I'm like, I wonder how well this held up. There's not one bit of freezer burn on that.
Yep. If it's done right.
I ate it, and I'm just like, my mouth is aching. It's just like,
taking you back to 2020.
Yeah. And so I think we just kind of touched on the idea of people not taking care of their meat in the field. I think there's also a skill set about taking care of your meat at home and in the freezer and stuff like that. And I'm beyond annoyed. I'm offended when people say, I got rid of that. It's a year old, or it's whatever. It's like, No.
I think a lot of it is people read online, what the suggested amount of time is, and they never bother to open it.
Yeah.
And test
If you don't open
smell
it, you don't smell it, you don't cut a little, see if it's freezer burned.
Yeah.
And if it is, just trim it.
Yeah. That's exactly. I was going to say that. I've had stuff where, man, I didn't do a very good job packaging that, and it got a little freezer burn. Well, that's what I got a cutting knife for.
A nice
You're going to have a really happy dog. Fillet knife.
Yeah. And I don't know. If anyone's got stuff you're going to throw away next year, bring it to me.
I was about to say,
seriously,
as much as I hate people doing it, I'm usually like the first one to raise their hand and be like, you're cleaning your freezer? I'll come over.
Yeah. Well, we got some meat out here that I'm going to send home with you.
Oh, and I would love that.
We got some caribou.
Oh, never had
it. Yeah.
You hunt up north. I've been lucky to hunt up north in Canada. The mountain caribou it's like they're big like elk. They're bigger than the barren ground caribou. And everyone's like, oh, you can't eat those things in September and October. They're too rutted up. Boy, I can't imagine how good they taste in August then, because they're really good in September and October.
Right.
So last year, Marcus and I were up there and we each shot one. So we got some here for you.
Nice. That is awesome.
Yeah. And who knows what else we might find in these freezers around here.
Something from 2020, maybe.
We got, nothing that old. We got a lot of processed, when I say processed meats, like specialty meats.
Yeah.
Marcus makes tons of sausage and brats and stuff like that. So our idea is when we're out in the field capturing content in the fall, we want to be showing people that we're eating the food from a prior hunt.
Yeah.
And people like that. And I'm glad they do.
Absolutely.
It's,
good you're doing that.
If you told me that I got to hunt, but I had to leave all the antlers out in the woods and the hides and everything, well, I still utilize those and it would bother me. But if you told me I had to leave the meat, I'd be done hunting.
Yeah.
I'd have it'd disconnect my interest in hunting because it would disconnect my connection to the food.
As my buddy Chef Will always says, you can't eat the antlers, right?
Yeah.
You cannot eat the antlers.
Yeah.
They are cool.
Yeah.
But it's the meat that drives me. Happy to hear that it's the same for you. And I know it's the same for Lindy.
Yeah.
I do have one more really quick question for you.
Sure.
If you're not able to process the meat yourself, how do you go about finding a good butcher who's not going to be letting your meat rot or give you something that wasn't yours back?
Any red flags?
We've definitely taken a pig to process. The only time that I remember ever taking meat into a processor, and they gave us an old boar back.
Yeah.
It was rancid.
Yeah.
And we gave in a very fresh pig. So,
that's probably a good question, and it probably varies by where you live. I luck out, and I know a lot of people who process game. I would defer to the smaller operator versus the great big operator.
Yeah, the one that has less deer hanging there.
Yeah.
I
would probably, if there's somebody who does cattle or pigs or livestock, the odds are they probably know what they're doing. And hopefully they're going to do a good job. But that's when this is where I have some trepidation about that, because I feel like I'm handing off the most important part of the equation to somebody else.
Yep.
I was like, I really want to do this myself.
That's right.
But, out here in Bozeman, east of town, I've got to know Buzz and Patty, who own Yellowstone Game Processing. And I've never had anything but great experience when I've had to drop something off there. But they're selling or closing the business. So I don't know what's going to happen there. Anna and Jesse are trying to start their own game processing business here in the valley. They're buddies with Matt out at North Bridger Bison.
Yeah.
They're fun people. Every time I see them, they're just you need to have them on your podcast.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah.
But they work in the meat processing business. Next week, or the week after, I'm doing a podcast with a meat processor from Washington, Tracy. He is kind of, I don't know what you'd call it. He's an advocate for wild game processing. And he said, one of the greatest problems we have in this food to table or field to table experience is we don't have qualified people and enough capacity to process game anymore. There's regulations. There's people like, I don't want carcasses around here. There's a whole big number of reasons why that's a diminishing skill set and the capacity is going away. I hope that eventually changes. But back to your question, Lindy, it's hard. It's almost like, who do I trust to babysit my child?
Yeah.
Boy, I've never had a bad experience because I've known the people personally. Anytime I have dropped something off, I don't know how I'd respond if I felt like I got someone else's meat or I got, something done poorly.
Yeah. Like my coworker's friend last year got his deer in basically like garbage bags.
What?
Like not even like vacuum sealed or packaged or anything.
Oh.
Yeah.
And it was like a third of what a mule deer should be.
Oh,
It's
my
tragic. I feel like some of them don't really give it as much care as they should.
Yeah, it was funny when we went and hunted in northern British Columbia, and the outfitter, we got reined in, but so before we could go out on our hunt, we got stuck there for 3 days.
Wow.
And he's like, man, we got all these moose hanging here. I'm going to have to take care of them. And me and Marcus, my camera guy, and another guy in camp were like, where are the knives?
That's awesome.
Who wants to stand around and watch the rain? Let's cut up some moose. So we spent 3 days cutting up moose.
Wow.
While we were there. And
I'm
we
sure
were
he was so
having
happy.
Absolute. Yeah. And we were one of the few people who drives to these hunts, and we carry a freezer in the back of the truck.
Smart.
If I go up to Canada and I shoot a moose and a caribou, that thing's coming home with me.
Yep.
Absolutely.
I'm not doing this fly and, I'll carry like a little gym bag of it. No, that whole thing's coming home with me. And I think when we got done loading the freezer and the coolers, I think the outfitter gave us more than what I'd shot.
Yeah, because of the help. Hey,
That's nice.
He said, well, you processed a lot of this stuff. Take all you want.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
But I give that as a little bit of perspective of just how much I enjoy it and how important it is to the hunting process.
Yeah, as I was about to say, it's like, it's a skill you really need to learn to complete that whole cycle.
Yeah.
Yep.
And once you do it, it's like some light bulb goes on. Like once you get to do it yourself, like going out and shooting an animal, it's already a very special experience. But once you actually process it yourself, get to learn it on that kind of level, the animal.
New appreciation.
Yeah, the appreciation just skyrockets.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I remember I had one friend that I had over, never hunted, and I was just like, hey, you want to experience this? He's like, yeah, I'll do it. And then he came over and he was like weirded out at the beginning, but then like once the head came off and everything, it was just hanging there. Like he got so into it.
Yeah.
And he was like, now he wants to hunt,
Yeah.
after that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
special.
When you do that, when you're learning that, you're going to make some mistakes.
Yeah,
Oh,
totally.
I think some people are so worried about making a mistake, and I'm glad they have that level of concern because it shows it's an expression of their value they place on the meat. But just know you're going to make some mistakes. But if you cut something the wrong way, that's not the end of the world.
No, you can still eat it.
There's a pile for stew and there's a pile for trim, and you'll get it right the next time.
Exactly.
And the other thing that I didn't touch on is the processing myself. That is part of what helps me through this reconciliation, as you were saying that, Poldy, about your friend, of something died. In this process of cleaning it out in the field, taking the hide off, getting it home. And now when I'm doing this processing, that's when the reconciliation of this is food. This is why I do this. This is food.
Yeah.
I know this sounds selfish, but it helps my struggles
Same.
to reconcile that.
Yeah.
Once it starts getting in these packages, that's food.
Yeah.
And I don't want to discount it that, yes, that was a life of a living, breathing animal, but that's part of the process humans have been going through
Forever.
since time began.
Yeah.
And I'm just thankful I live in a place where I can still do that.
Yeah.
On that note, Randy, that's a great ending, I think.
I think so too, yeah.
It's been an absolute pleasure sitting down with you. This has to be one of my most fun podcasts I've done in a while.
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, thank you.
We're so thankful that you let us come to your studio here. This is awesome.
Yeah.
And we had a bunch more questions, but this was perfect now.
Well, episode 2 someday.
Yeah,
we'd love to do
2.
that. That would be awesome.
Well, thanks for looking me up. And I know when we spoke at Big Sky, I said, yeah, call me. And I've been on the road and it took us a couple months, but thanks for your persistence.
Oh,
absolutely.
All good.
If we're anything, we're persistent.
Yeah. And, hopefully soon I get to make some German, once the hunting season comes along, some traditional German liver sausage. And I don't know if you eat that, but I'll bring you a glass. Yeah. It's good.
It's pretty great.
Really?
It doesn't taste like liver.
No.
Yeah, I'd try it.
Good.
I'll try anything.
Yeah.
If it's from an animal, I will try everything.
That's the mindset you got to have.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great. Randy, thank you so much. That was
thank
awesome.
you, Boldy. Lindy, thank you so much.